přátelé, zdravím vás u svého dalšího kytarového videa. A dneska trošku změníme koncept a od českých kytaristů odskočíme do Anglie, respektive Anglie přiskočí k nám, jelikož Justin Lavash je anglický písničkář, zpěvák a kytarista, který už asi 14 let žije v Praze. No a když jsem asi před měsícem byl na jeho koncertě, a tak mi došlo, že to je opravdu skvělý adept do tohohle mýho seriálu, protože ač hraje sám, tak mu to zní, jako kdyby tam hrála celá kapela. A je to plný energie, je to plný prostě zajímavých zvuků a všeho, takže přeju pěkný pokoukání. Hi Justin, welcome.
Hi.
I'm so happy you are here in my guitar review.
Well, it's great to be here in Bluesbahnhof, one of my favourite clubs in Prague.
So, are you ready to jump into your gear and speak about your guitars and stuff?
Yeah, with pleasure.
Okay, let's go.
It's nice to be asked.
Okay, let's go to guitar.
Okay.
So, what's this guitar?
This guitar is a Fender F35 Dreadnought acoustic guitar that I have had for about 38 years now.
Wow.
This is my first proper guitar, actually. I got this guitar when I was about 11 or 12 years old. I think it's from about 1979. This is one of the first Japanese Fender acoustic guitars, certainly, and these were the thing that was coming into Britain in the late 70s and 80s. These Japanese imports were starting to come in, and I still play. This is my main guitar. This is my main gigging guitar. I have a second one like it, which I also use, but I do most of my work on this one. And it's a great guitar. It's just I don't think it's an amazingly special acoustic guitar, but I think it's kind of got a nice sound across the range. So you get nice deep end from it, and it's solid. It can take quite a lot of wear and tear, and I don't feel too worried about I mean, it's got a lot of sentimental value, but I don't really tend to play very expensive acoustic guitars in the kind of gigs that I do.
I understand. But do you have some special improvement of pickups and stuff to pick yours?
Yeah, I used star pickups. I don't tend to use piezo pickups. This pickup is a Fishman rare earth blend, I think it is. So it has a microphone as well, and it has then this magnetic pickup here. But I don't use the microphone in it. Yeah. I just use the pickup because really, in a way, I want to process the sound from this guitar. So I don't want microphones getting the ambient sound of the guitar. It's better to have a magnetic pickup for me, and I don't like piezos very much. I find them quite, personally, I don't like the sound of them so much. So I tend to use magnetic pickups and acoustic guitars. And I use acoustic guitars because I do mostly solo work, and they have better compression, so I can really hit this guitar, and it has a natural compression which if I was playing an electric guitar, it's just straight into the desk because I don't use an amplifier. Yeah. It's too much signal all at once. It's too cruel on the ears, really. So that's why I tend to use acoustic guitars. And these Fishman, I had a Bags pickup, but I prefer this Fishman in a way. The Bags pickup was too noisy for me. My right hand moves around a lot and make a lot of banging, so this Fishman doesn't pick a lot of that up, so I quite like it for that.
Okay. And what about strings?
Strings are 12s to 54s. Because I like heavy gauges, often because I was detuning, I got used to playing heavy gauges, and I find I get better tone out of heavy gauges. I'm a heavy-handed player, so
makes sense.
I tend to play heavy gauges as well, you know.
And what brand of strings you use?
I use Martins, but they're the cheapest ones. I also use Lee Hooker strings as well. I'm not particularly fussy about strings because I get through them so quickly that
how long?
One gig, maybe two, because I have a sweat which just corrodes strings very quickly, so that's one problem. and then using a slide, especially, which we'll come to later, but using brass slide like this on strings tends to really shorten the lifespan of them as well.
Okay, and tuning, you are just a regular tuning, but in D? Or? No,
this guitar is actually tuned to just standard tuning, E, A, D, G, B, E at 440, but I use an octave with it quite a lot of the time, not all of the time, but quite a lot of the time. But this guitar now, I keep in pretty much standard tuning.
Because I thought you were using bottlenecks, so you maybe have a different tuning.
Well, when I use a lot of my slide stuff, I'll do in open G or C, or like you said, D, but I tend to use another guitar for that now. Okay. Because what was happening was that I was changing tuning so much on one guitar that it's not great for the guitar, really. The neck moves around a lot, and it was difficult to hold tune. And I was getting a lot of needing a lot of refret work. And this guitar is almost 40 years old now, so I decided to start giving her a break. So I bought another 1979 Japanese Fender F35 as my second guitar, partly to have a spare in case anything happened to this or it needs repairing, and also because I wanted a guitar that would be dedicated for open tunings.
Okay.
And ideally, the best thing to have would be one guitar per open tuning. Because even when I can tune a guitar into open tuning pretty quickly, but it will be in, but then it will slip out because of the movement of the neck. So it's very hard to predict really how a guitar is going to move with that kind of tuning, that kind of quite brutal tuning really.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's better to use, I found it's better to use a guitar per tuning if you can.
It makes sense, yeah, keep it safe.
But I get sick of changing strings, you know, that's then two guitars to change strings. I just had enough now.
You get the money from the gig and then put it to...
Yeah, I should just invest in string companies, really.
You really definitely need some sponsor.
I know, it would be nice, yeah, exactly, yeah, it's true.
Any interesting story for this guitar?
I've taken this guitar all over the world. I was a jazz musician in London, and I had this guitar fitted out with a PAF kind of a Kent Armstrong pickup, and did a lot of jazz gigs, and it sounded great. You can get a great jazz sound out of an acoustic guitar. A lot of people think that you can only get an acoustic sound out of an acoustic guitar, but if you put a magnetic pickup in it, you can really start getting quite electric guitar sounds, so it becomes very versatile. Mm-hmm. I took this guitar on contract. I worked contracts out in the Caribbean on cruise ships. This guitar came with me then. I've busked on this guitar on the street, you know, I've travelled and slept on this guitar even. I used to play a gig in Calais in France where, you know, I wouldn't finish until sort of too late to get the last train home, so I'd have to sleep on this guitar. So yeah, I got back a long way with this guitar. Almost too far in a way. I think really I should retire her in some ways. I got these Sperzel, is it, these machine heads for her to make tuning even quicker. Yeah. And they're pretty good actually, I'd have to say. They make sort of tuning quicker, and they're quite strong as well, because like I say, I'm quite a heavy-handed guitarist, so tuning does tend to slip quite a lot. But I noticed the difference between, I mean, I have another guitar exactly the same year, same model as this one, but this one is definitely a better guitar. So it's interesting that even, you know, the differences you get between two guitars is profound sometimes, even if they're the same model, the same year, same wood. So, yeah.
So tell us about something about your picks and slide and these small tools.
The accessories here, I have, I use thumb picks. I use usually Dunlop, large thumb picks. I have a big thumb, and so I use these large Dunlop thumb picks. And unfortunately, I'm sort of chained to this thing now. I can use a flat pick, but since I think probably about 28, almost 30 years, I've been using thumb picks as part of my style, and no matter what style I play. Sometimes I kind of use it as a flat pick, but mostly I use it in the traditional way. So that's a kind of inherent part of my style now, thumb pick. And I often use a bottleneck as well. This is a brass slide. I tend to use metal slides because I prefer a heavier slide. I don't like to have to press too hard against the strings, so I like that kind of, the weight of the slide. I tend to use it as a kind of part of my playing. But I used to play a heavier one. This is actually quite thin. There's just over 1 millimeter, I think. But I used to play a heavier, thicker one. I prefer the sound. You get a nice sort of crunch out of them when you hit the strings with the.
Let's just show us.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. This is how I'd sort of use slide typically. Usually on these top strings here. So. You can use it also on these lower strings. I get a nice smack if I hit it against the lower strings. I'll kind of show you what I mean. Which is kind of quite a lot of fun if you want to make a big kind of bassy slap at the end of your statement. So yeah, I mix it up. I'm using a mixture of fingerstyle right hand, and then my slide here is on my double finger, it's on my pinky here, which means that these other fingers are free to fret notes if I want to. So I can use a mixture of chord work, I can use this for lead work, and you get something like this kind of thing.
So what next these small tools are you using?
I use quite a lot. I use a capo, particularly in C and G, because if you're playing an open tuning, the trouble is that you don't want to keep playing a song in G, so it's nice to use a capo to vary the tuning. And I don't tend to use a capo much in standard tuning, but I use one in C. So here, for instance, I stick it on the 5th fret. This usually requires a little bit of retuning because the bass strings tend to get pulled a little bit tighter than the others. So you get a kind of nice sweet sound at the top as well, and you know, you can play slide up here. It gets trickier to play slide when you've got a capo because the distance between the strings and the frets is smaller up here. So that's another advantage to having two guitars like this one. I typically use in standard tuning now, but my other guitar will use an open tuning, and there's a slightly higher action, which makes the slide playing slightly easier as well. And that's where higher gauge strings help as well. Anything less than a 12, for instance, on this E string, I find difficult to play if it's tuned down, say a tone, like if you're using open G. That's often a problem, is that as the string tension goes down, then basically it gets harder to get a decent note out of it if the gauge of the string is not very heavy. And similarly, I like to use a nice big fat bass end, so I like nice big heavy strings. But here in this case, I'm in open C. And it's always a bit of a compromise because this E string is now tuned down to a low C, so it makes it quite difficult to get the fretted notes in tune. It's always a compromise between the two. That's again why having another guitar solely for open tuning is better, because it tends to stay more stable for longer.
Okay, okay. I can see a little tuner. Is it?
Yeah, I use this tuner here. This is one of these Polytune.
TC.
Yeah, these TC ones, and they're nice. It's quite nice because you can tune all 6 strings at once, which is an advantage, being able to do all of the strings at once.
Yeah, I use this option.
Sometimes I do, yeah. The trouble is that I find it's not so accurate on the E and A strings. It shows them out of tune a lot, and I'm not convinced that they are out of tune. There's a thing as well where sometimes I might tune my E a fraction low because I'm hitting it so hard that I need it that it's gonna be a little bit sharp when it. I do tend to hit strings quite hard sometimes, particularly these bass strings get quite a brutal beating from me on a concert.
So okay, let's move your floor magic.
Yes.
Show us your magic.
I will show you my magic. Okay, yeah. Here, well, it's not actually horribly complicated, but my guitar comes in here to my tuner, and then I have effectively it splits out here. I use the bypass as a separate signal out, so let's look at that first. That bypass goes into this Boss super octave here, and I have it set on a mode which is called poly mode, which is a great thing. It basically means that I can add an octave below to certain strings. I can decide how far that octave goes. So, for instance, let me just turn this on. You can hear now. This is just what's coming out of the octave now. So it's here on these low notes. On these low notes, you can hear this octave, but as I go up, you'll hear the octave disappear. So, in fact, these higher notes will not be octavized. So here it's octavized. And as we go up, you can hear the octave getting less. So basically, that gives me these low strings here to be put through the octave. There's a level here that I can set. I've got a piece of tape here to set to keep it in one place. But I can move this around, so if I was to stick it all the way over here, everything would be put through the octave.
So the pedal can recognize what spectrum of frequencies is going to be active.
Exactly, yeah. So that's quite a nice feature on this super octave. I think that it's not as good an octave as, for instance, the whammy octave, which that can do chords and stuff. But I do love this feature on this octave that not all my notes are getting put through it, only these lower notes. So in effect, I'm just adding a lower octave to some of those bass notes is the way I want it. So that this gives me a certain amount of movement now that I can use to get a nice big fat bass end out of my guitar, which is good when you're playing live as well. And there's a big PA. And you want to fill it because as guitarists, you know, we've got to fill that space as well. So it gives me a kind of wider frequency to play with, which is great for gigs.
That's true. Like your live gigs sounds like pretty huge and sound is everywhere. And
well, that's what I want to achieve because for me, I'm not a kind of I'm not a singer-songwriter who accompanies himself on guitar. For me, my guitar is very much part of my gig, you know, is very much part of my sound, and I want my voice to sit in the middle of it. So it's difficult as a guitarist. Sometimes they want to kind of come in and give you a low cut and compression, and the guitar becomes a smaller and smaller sound. But actually, if we're on our own, we need a big sound.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's the bass end. So this is coming out of my bypass here. That's going into the octave. That's a separate channel now, and I'll give this channel to the sound man. He'll just on one channel will just be these bassy notes, okay? And then the second thing is coming into here. My actual output is coming into this Boss line selector, which again splits my signal, and half of it stays clean. It's just a clean guitar signal, which it would be this. I'll take off my octave. That's the guitar now, just clean. But this is a kind of like a little mixing desk, if you like, with 2 channels. And what I have going into the second channel is this multi-stomp. It's an MS-50 guitar multi-effects by Zoom. And I have that coming through this volume pedal, so that basically I can send signal into this, this multi-effects through this volume pedal, and then it comes out and back into this line selector here, and then that is my signal that is now mixed and sent to the desk here. So that's my second signal. It's a mixture of clean here, and then when I put this pedal down, I now get the effects through this Zoom multi-stomp. So you can hear I've got some delay on it now, and on this setting it's delay. But I can use it for different effects, because I can put like 5 different effects in here in sequence. So, for instance, here I've got it doing distortion. You can hear as I bring the pedal down, the distortion and the delay are coming in there. It's a nice effect, you know. It means I can. I don't have to sort of tap dance around different effects all the time. I've got this whole thing of sort of one volume pedal, and my foot is resting on that volume pedal now. Or I could use it for. I've got some other. So I've got here that could be quite nice. Yeah, here we go with some flanger. So actually what I can do is for each song, I can have a different setting on this multi-stomp, and I just have to cue it up, and it gives me a whole different set of effects that I can cue in using a volume pedal, and I'm not messing around with lots of different effects boxes.
So it's like more about how you feel in that moment.
Yeah. You
can add it or...
Exactly. I find that particularly useful with things like delay. Like, let me give you an example here. I mean, that's a slow delay. I wouldn't want that going all the time if I was playing. I mean, on my own, it'd be too much. But the idea of being able to drop it in is great. Here I am clean. But now if I drop in the delay in like punctuated moments, it's quite an effective way of using delay. I'll give you an example. So it means I have much more control over delay than, you know, with me, I'm quite clumsy, you know, I can't really tap dance around on lots of effects. So to have it all on one volume pedal is a great advantage with someone like me. And when I mix that in with my octava, I can get quite a big, full sound. So there's a lot of frequency now. So one thing I can do, for instance, on this multi-effects, multi-stomp, is have some kind of harmonization going, which I can use at specific moments, again, through this volume pedal. So for instance, here I've got a fifth on top of my notes that, again, I can bring in through the volume pedal here. And that can be quite an effective, kind of swell effect. And in combination with the octava here, I can get quite a nice kind of thing going on where I've got this fifth going on the top through the pedal, and then that octava working on these lower strings here, and then using some right-hand technique, I'm going to create quite a big fat sound out of that. So here we go. So you get this kind of like bass thing going. And I tend to use that effect quite a lot. I've got this octava does give me a nice big fat end, and then I can stick through this pedal. I can add kind of more ethereal effects on the top. You know, there's one here. Here's the one. Well, again, through with a flanger, and I think on this and some delay. Here's my octava at the bottom. So actually it's a phaser and delay, wasn't it, there? I can use it for, this is a kind of nice phaser effects, but in, flanger effects, but in time, with the delay as well. So I get quite a lot of control, you know, with my volume pedal, which is quite a nice way of using it. I was thinking about using 2 volume pedals, really, but the idea of having this one clean signal makes using this multi-stomp more effective, because the true bypass on this multi-stomp isn't great, but having one clean, dedicated clean signal that will always be clean means that I don't have to worry too much about the quality of that.
So your unaffected signal is always here?
Yes.
Just adding, mixing, together with effect.
Exactly, because this thing is like a mixing desk for clean and, let's say, affected signal. Yeah. So this is my clean signal here, and this is the affected signal, so I can, again, if I feel there's too much or too little, I can mix it here, which is quite a nice, it gives me quite a lot of freedom as well. Some of these effects, they can be quite brutal. It would be, in a way, I could have a more brutal effect than I would want all the time. For instance, something like, this would be more brutal effects than I would have normally all the time. It's quite a lot of detune in there, it's quite aggressive. But again, through the pedal, it's kind of nice because you can just bring it in and out when you want, so it's not like you're getting it all the time, you know. So it's a different way of approaching effects that I don't feel chained to effect that I'm going to be running through the entirety of a song. I can bring it in and out. It gives me quite a lot of freedom, which is nice.
And how you use the second pedal, like volume pedal?
This volume pedal, I use this really for this drum machine. I run drum loops on here, and it's too difficult for me to turn it off by hand, you know. So it's easier for me to just stamp on a volume pedal than it is for me to do anything with my hands. You know, a lot of my playing comes from my right hand, so I'm quite lucky in a way that I can be playing now with my right hand and then reach over and you know, do stuff, which is quite lucky. I mean, I can turn stuff on and off, that's quite lucky. But if I'm in the middle of something, it's quite difficult to just kill a drum machine in time, so
So yeah, you can use it externally.
Yeah, exactly.
So okay, let's move to your magic case.
Yes. Yeah, this case was I call it my devil box, because the old blues guys, they said that a guitar amplifier was a devil box because the devil would come up through the electricity into the guitar amplifier.
What is inside?
Inside this case is a loop station. This is an RC30 Boss loop station. Actually, somebody gave me this. I don't loop with it, as you can see. There's nothing going into it, but I do actually have some stuff on it which I use a lot on concerts. I use it for 2 things. I use it to give me some sort of background noise or some kind of basic ambient noise, which will either usually cover the sound of me tuning between open tunings, because I have one guitar for open tuning, but I use it for 3 or 4 open tunings, so that will take a while, and I tend to be quite a heavy hitter, so I'll probably be retuning between songs, and I hate that moment between songs where, you know, you have to listen to
nothing happens.
Nothing happens. You feel the energy dissipating as people listen to you tune a guitar. So I have things on here, if I can play you a couple of short ones.
Okay.
There's the C side, yeah, there's the C side. And I think I have here, these are they're quite funny. I think people sort of laugh when I also use it though, I mean, what's quite useful for is, for instance, okay, I have a song that is in open C and I need to tune to it, and I know that I'm going to be tuning probably when I play this song. So I hit this, and what it is a kind of like pedal, as we say, like a low C, which both covers the sound of me tuning and gives me a tone to kind of tune to. So Here we go. Okay, so that gives me a kind of like rough tuning now. I know that this guitar is roughly in C, and then I can use the tuner to fine-tune it, because I find those moments of tuning, I'm trying to make them as quick as possible so that I don't lose people's attention when I'm playing. But I use it for that a lot, and then I use it for drum loops as well, because I can do a certain amount of simulating of drums with my right hand, but there are some feels I can't get. I can give you an example of that. I mean, I can kind of get a kind of like backbeat in with my right hand. Let me give you an example. So I can kind of get that kind of rock thing, you know. I think reasonably convincingly, but there are some drum sounds that are harder to get, some fields are harder to get, especially if I'm playing more fingerstyle. So I might use a drum machine to get that. Like here's an example of one. This is for Fox and Hounds. So this is my drum loop here. I'll give it a bit more volume. So I mean, I can actually get a bass. I can get my bass line in there as well. I mean, I've got a bass line going on and some kind of a lead thing as well, and I can mix it up with this drum loop. So that's my kind of bass line. When I put it on top of this, and then I add in my effects through this pedal here. And then I've got a second channel on this RC30, and I often maybe stick a simple synthesizer, something or other in there, just so it gives me a little bit of something extra to play with that I can maybe put in to give it a real boost. So I get a... Drums are here. Together, that's that. And that's nice with this RC30, it's got these two channels, I've recorded these in, but it also has some built-in effects, and it's got a built-in drum machine here as well, so I can actually add that drum machine to what I've got here. So these are the drums that I put in here from a drum machine. Here I add in its drum machine. Add my synthesizer in, and some effects. Delay here. So it's quite a versatile tool because I can actually record 2 channels in here, then use the built-in drum machine and also use these effects, and I can mix those things around with relative ease. It's quite user-friendly and it's quite robust as well. So it was easier than carrying a little drum machine or something around.
It's great, like really powerful tool in small case.
It is, yeah. It's a nice piece of gear. I mean, Boss stuff. I do like it because it travels well, it gigs well, and it seems to operate well. It's solid, you know. So I was lucky to get it. Really, I was given it, but it's a nice piece of kit.
Okay, I have just a question about your beginnings. Like, how you start play guitar?
Yeah, well, I was given a guitar by my mother, my mother was a big folk fan. She was a big Bob Dylan fan, and she loved folk music. So she got me a guitar when I was 10, and I got classical lessons at first, but I didn't like it. And it wasn't really until my father had a couple of friends who were good players, who kind of gave me lessons informally for quite a while. And I learnt rock style playing from one of them, and he was called Steve, and another guy called Rob, who was a big influence on my playing. He was a kind of jazz folk player. And he taught me some finger style. He taught me this kind of Travis style that I use a lot, this kind of this thumb thing. Yeah. And he played with a thumb pick, so I think that I probably took quite a lot of influence from him. At school, I played on saxophone, and I sang in the choir as well at school. If you played an instrument at school, you had to sing in the choir, so we had a good music department at school. I had a good music teacher. And so I learned some theory and some harmony in school as well. But I never studied music officially after school, although I did courses in London and a couple of other little courses that they were either part-time or just once a week. And I took lessons from players that I liked. So I was lucky that at the time I was living in London, there were a couple of really good courses in jazz and harmony arrangement. And there were some nice players around who were teaching. So I was sort of autodidact. I was teaching trying to learn a lot myself and then taking bits from other people. And I suppose that's the way I've learned guitar, is that I've taken little bits from lots of places, but I didn't go through one particular school, really. Yeah.
And have you been in a regular band?
I was in, like a lot of kids, I was in a band with some friends of mine when I was like 13, 14, you know, and then like in my early 20s I was in bands. And then when I was a jazz player, I did a lot of playing in quartets and quintets. And then I did a lot of contract work in the late 90s up to about 2001. So I was working in lots of bands, cabaret bands, and I did some big band playing as well. So I do pretty much only solo gigs now, but I have played in lots of bands and some quite big ensembles as well, and I love it. It's great fun. Yeah. I miss it. Yeah.
And when you moved to Czech Republic,
I moved.
How it happens? Like, you decide to stay and.
Well, I moved here because I came here in 2004. But I knew Czech people. I had some Czech friends from way back in 1991, because I came here in 91 to visit a friend of mine who moved here then, an English friend, a good friend of mine from school. And he was, it was just after the Velvet Revolution. It was a very interesting time here. So I met his friends and we stayed in contact. I came over here a couple of times, and I was getting to a point where I wanted to move out of London, and I wanted to move to a place where I felt I could compose and create more. And I felt this country would be a good place to do that, because I could see myself being able to work here and live here without fighting to just pay the rent. London is a game, I think, like a lot of big cities like Paris or New York. Most of your time in London is spent just trying to make the money to pay the rent, and it's not really a good environment for creating in, you know. So that's why I think one of the reasons I came here. It's a beautiful country with a rich cultural history, And I think it was a good time to come here because I think about 15 years after the revolution was a time when this country was starting to really expand into areas that would make it possible for me to live here more easily.
So, Justin, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
It was really interesting, and I hope it was inspiring for you guys.
Yes.
So, if you have a chance to go Justin concert, just do it.
Do it. I advise it strongly.
Or just find him on internet, Facebook, YouTube.
Justin Lavash.
Yeah. See you soon.
Take care.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Pleasure.